Welcome to this .NET MAUI DataGrid tutorial. In this video, I will demonstrate how to export a data grid to PDF, exclude columns and header during the export, and customize the appearance in the Syncfusion .NET MAUI DataGrid. I open an existing MAUI application. Here I have already configured the .NET MAUI DataGrid control and bound the orders info collection to the item's source property. To learn how to add the .NET MAUI DataGrid control to your MAUI application, watch the video linked to the YouTube card above or the description below. Now, I run the application. You will see the list of order details displayed. Next, I will show you how to export a data grid to a PDF. First, I add a stack layout and define a button control labeled Export to PDF to trigger the export functionality. Then I navigate to the event handler method. Here I create a memory stream to hold the PDF file data. I initialize a DataGrid PDF exporting controller, which is a part of the Syncfusion library to handle the export logic. You can customize the export settings by using the DataGrid PDF exporting option. Then call Export to PDF method on the DataGrid, which generates a PDF document object. This object is then saved to the memory stream. I define the Save Service class in the Android folder to save and access files on the device using File Provider. Within the class, I create a method called Save and View to handle saving a file to the device local storage and viewing it. I define a variable called root to store the directory path where the file will be saved. I check whether the external storage is emulated, indicating that it is virtual storage. If it is, then the app saves the files to an external downloads folder. Otherwise, the file will be saved in the internal My Documents directory. Next, I define a subdirectory called Syncfusion within the root directory and create it if it doesn't already exist. After that, create a file object pointing to the specified directory and file name. If a file with the same name already exists, delete it to avoid conflicts. Within the try-catch block, the file data from the memory stream is written using file output stream. Any exceptions that occur during the writing process will be caught and their details will be stored in an exception variable. Furthermore, I will show you how to verify whether a file exists, and if it does, how to open it using an appropriate app, while handling differences in Android versions to ensure compatibility and security. First, I check if the file exists on the device. If the Android version is Nougat or newer, I use a file provider to generate a secure content URI for the file, as direct file paths can no longer be shared between apps for security reasons. Next, I create an instance of intent that specifies it should view the file, setting the file URI generated by the file provider as the intent's data. I also ensure that the intent starts a new task, which is necessary when launching the file outside the app, and grant temporary read permissions. I launch the intent to open the file using the appropriate app. To learn how to view the PDF on Android versions below Nougat, check the code snippet in the documentation linked in the description below. To define a file provider path for securely sharing files with other apps on Android, I create a folder within the Resources directory. In the XML file, I declare the namespace for the Android attribute, and then define a file path type, mapping it to a specific directory on external storage. Next, I open the Android manifest file to set up the file provider required for secure file sharing. Within the application tag, I define a provider tag. In that, I specify the class name for the file provider and set a unique identifier that dynamically replaces the app's package name. Then I set the exported attribute to false to restrict other apps from directly interacting with the file provider and set the grant URI permissions to true to allow other apps to access files shared via the file provider. Next, I declare a metadata tag and specify the predefined key in the name attribute so that the Android system recognizes the configuration of the file provider. I also specify the file path in the Resources attribute. Finally, I move on to the Export to PDF method. I use the Save Service class, which is already defined to save and view the PDF file, allowing the user to open the file on their device. Once the application is loaded, I click on the button. You'll see the file is exported to PDF. To learn how to export a data grid to PDF on Windows, iOS, and the Mac Catalyst platform, check the documentation link in the description below. Next, I will show you how to exclude specific columns while exporting to PDF. In this case, I will remove the order ID and customer ID from the data grid. To do this, within the export to PDF method, I will create an instance of a list to store the strings. Then I add the order ID and customer ID to the list. I assign the list to the excluded columns property of the DataGrid PDF exporting option object. So any column in the data grid with a name that matches an entry in the excluded columns list will not be included in the PDF. When I click the button, you will see that the PDF does not display the order ID and customer ID. To display all the columns on a single page, I set the Can Fit All Columns in One Page property to true. Before running the application, I'll remove the code snippet related to the previous customization. As you can see, all the columns are displayed on the same page. To disable the header while exporting, I set the Can Export Header property to false. Notice that the header is not displayed. Finally, I will show you how to customize the appearance of the data. First, I enable the Can Apply Grid Style property. Then I remove the code snippet related to the previous customization. Next, in the Data Grid control, I define the Default Style property and add the Data Grid Style class. Then I specify a color for the row background and header row background properties. As you can see, the background color has been applied to the data grid. Let me wrap up this video. You have learned how to export a data grid to PDF, exclude columns and headers during the export, and customize the appearance in the Syncfusion .NET MAUI DataGrid. If you want to see this example's working code, download it from the GitHub link in the description below. I have also included a link where you can check if you qualify for our community license, which gives you a free license key for our entire .NET MAUI controls. If you found this video helpful, click the like button and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.